Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. I know I'm competing with lunch, so I'll try to make this as expedient as possible. I've spent a lot of time listening to people tell stories about brands. And when you do that, and you listen to people talk about the brands that really matter to them, that are the most meaningful in their lives, you realize that they're really not talking about the brand. They're talking about themselves. They're using the brand as a narrative device to express something about their own identities. The most meaningful brands to them are really characters that are playing a role in their life story, or what psychologists would call their narrative identity. And if you begin to think about brands as characters, you realize very quickly that great brands and great fictional characters have a lot in common. A lot of the qualities, the attributes of great fictional characters are the same qualities and attributes of great brands, the brands that people use and incorporate in their life story. So that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about what we can learn from fictional characters. What qualities do they possess, and how does that change the way we might think about brand strategy and the way that we might think about our insight work? So before I go any further, I want to introduce you to one of my favorite fictional characters of recent memory. You may know this guy. I think he's wonderful.
Skylar. All the things that I did, you need to understand.
I have to hear one more time that you did this for the family.
I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. And I was really alive.
Do we know who that is? Does anybody not know who that is? Okay, Walter White from Breaking Bad, talking about his 5-year career as a meth dealer. All right. I love that character, and I love that series. I've watched it twice, once by myself, then again with my family. My 2 teenage sons became fans of the series, and which caused my wife and I to reflect on our parenting. Because my parents exposed me to Little House on the Prairie when I was growing up. I'm showing my kids this story about a meth dealer. Anyway, what I loved about Walter White is from the beginning of that series all the way through to the end, there was a core to that character that was consistent. He was never out of character, and yet he managed to grow and evolve and develop and reveal things about himself in almost every episode that we didn't know before. That's a clip from the final episode, I think, or close to it. And we learned he's expressing something about himself that we hadn't heard before in the series. Totally Walter White-ish, but still enabling us to discover things about him. The character had complexity, it had nuance, he had depth. He surprised us, even to the very end of the series. Great brands have a lot of the same qualities, and they give their consumers tools like that, narrative devices that they can incorporate into their own stories. We'll talk more about that in just a minute, but I want to now introduce you to another one of my favorite characters.
Hello, ladies. Look at your man. Now back to me. Now back at your man. Now back to me. Sadly, he isn't me. But if he stopped using lady-scented body wash and switched to Old Spice, he could smell like he's me. Look down. Back up. Where are you? You're on a boat with the man your man could smell like. What's in your hand? Back at me. I have it. It's an oyster with 2 tickets to that thing you love. Look again. The tickets are now diamond. Anything is possible when your man smells like Old Spice and not a lady. I'm on a horse.
Oh my God. Great spot. I started using Old Spice deodorant the day after I saw that commercial on the Super Bowl. It was just incredible. It totally repositioned the brand for me. Now, the character I'm talking about is not the stud on the horse, although he's impressive, by all means. The character is the brand. The character there is the brand, and the brand plays a role in a story. It's my life story. Sounds a little strange, but just as Walter White was a character that was central to the story of Breaking Bad, Old Spice is a brand, a character that plays a role in the story of my life. Now, those are my two sons, Jimmy and Alex. They're now smelly teenage boys. They use Old Spice deodorant. That is Bear, who does not, but probably should. But the point being is that I use that brand, Old Spice, to reaffirm something about myself. The interesting thing about a deodorant brand is it's not symbolic in the way that we normally think about brand meaning being symbolic. When we think about symbolic brands, usually they're badge brands. They're things like a car or a beer. We're trying to symbolize something to someone else. I don't use Old Spice that way. I don't think anybody, well, now all of you know that I use Old Spice, but I don't walk around telling people that, right? I use it to tell myself a story. And that's what narrative identity is all about. That's when psychologists talk about narrative identity, that's what they mean. I'm using that brand to tell myself a story every morning to reaffirm the kind of man I want to be, okay? To me, Old Spice represents masculinity with a nod and a wink. There's humor to it. It's masculinity that doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think when I see that on my bathroom counter every morning, I'm using that brand to reaffirm that notion, because that's the kind of guy I want to be. Now you know way more about my inner psychology than I've revealed to a lot of audiences, but so that brand plays an important role in my life story. So what is narrative identity? Basically, psychologists would tell us that we are all storytellers. We're all makers of our own mythology. Dan McAdams, Northwestern guy, he's head of the psychology department at Northwestern, has written extensively about this. Buy a Dan McAdams book and read it. They're fascinating. It's great stuff, totally relevant to what all of us do in this room. McAdams would argue we are all creators of our own personal mythologies. Every day we are weaving together our past experiences, our memories, our experiences today, and our aspirations, who we want to become, into a story of identity that tries to give our lives meaning, that tries to give us a sense of purpose and consistency. That's what narrative identity is about. Now, brands play a role in that. We use brands and their symbolic meaning to help tell ourselves these stories. That's how I'm using Old Spice in my life, okay? So if we think about brands this way, and Will Novy is a brand strategist, I've totally stolen this quote, but it's such a great way to think about and conceptualize what brands are. We use brands to tell ourselves stories about who we are. If we begin to think about brands as characters that play roles in our life story, as I said earlier, we begin to realize that great brands share a lot of qualities with great fictional characters. And we can draw inspiration for that. And as insights professionals, we can also listen for these qualities in the stories that our consumers tell. Narrative potential becomes a measure of brand strength. So what we've started doing when we talk to consumers is not only measure brand strength by the typical things we usually think about, brand awareness, what emotional and functional benefits does a brand offer, what perceptions surround that brand, all of those things. We're also listening for the brand's narrative potential. When people talk about the brand, are they really talking about themselves? And if they are, you're onto something. So what are some of those qualities? Well, there's a lot of literature out there about what makes great fictional characters. Tons of books about screenwriting, fiction writing, so you can glean some of these attributes. And when I began reading some of this stuff, I was like, holy cow, a lot of these things apply to great brands, a lot of these attributes. Here are 5, which I think great brands and great fictional characters have in common. Agency. Great fictional characters do stuff. They act. They influence the plot line. They move the story ahead. They take dramatic action, right? They do things that are interesting. They control their own destinies. I think great brands do the same thing. For me, Netflix is a brand that does this. This is a company that's basically blown itself up and changed its business model, what, 3 times? I think they might be on their 4th iteration now. They make bold moves. And part of the reason why I think I'm a Netflix subscriber is because I like that. I'd like to think of myself kind of that way, that I'm bold, that I'm innovative, that I'm out in front. Using Netflix for me reaffirms that about myself. I incorporate that into my narrative identity. Motivation. Great brands make it clear, and great fictional characters make it clear why they act the way they do. What's the motivation for what they're doing? Do they have a cause? Do they have a mission? Great characters make that clear to the audience. I think great brands do the same thing. Do we have any IKEA fans in the room? Yeah? IKEA's mission is on its website. It's beautiful. I love it. They are all about creating everyday life for the many, creating great everyday life for the many. And it has this egalitarian quality to it, and it has this democratic quality to it. Those are values that I share, I would like to share. So when I use IKEA, when I buy from that brand, it's reflected in their products and their marketing and their pricing even. I get a little hit of that. There's a commonality there. I'm incorporating them into my narrative identity. Conflict. Great characters, that's where the drama comes from, right? They have a fight, they have a struggle, they overcome challenges, and oftentimes great characters make it clear not only what they stand for, but what they stand against. So Smart Car is a great example of this as a brand doing the same thing. A few years ago, Smart Car had a campaign that was called Against Dumb. Does anybody remember that? Anybody see any of that advertising? Basically, they were challenging and setting themselves up against the excesses of modern life. That is not part of my narrative identity. I want to make it clear. I drive a big sedan. My wife has a big gas-guzzling SUV. But it is part of the narrative identity of a good friend of mine who owns a Smart Car. And every time he comes to my house, he likes to basically use that to express the superiority of his identity relative to mine. So that's fine. Complexity, I talked about this with Walter White. Great characters are complex. What's interesting about this, I think, from a brand standpoint, is that those of us that have been around brand strategy and have grown up through sort of the traditional rules of marketing have been told ad infinitum that great brands, have one sort of stand for one core thing, and they drive that home again and again and again. Simple idea. That's basically the precept of positioning. Well, I'm not sure that that's true. I think great brands have a core that's consistent, but I think that they allow for discovery, that they're constantly revealing new things about themselves. That's how you stay relevant. That's how you stay a current part of your consumer's narrative identity. What could be more one-dimensional than yogurt? If you think about a boring category, Greek yogurt might take the cake, but Chobani is an amazingly complex company and a complex brand. The more I discover about their origin story, their founder, their entrepreneurial spirit, their political activism, what they're doing in terms of hiring policies, they're constantly revealing things about themselves to me that make them fascinating. I want to see what they're going to do next. Who knows? They're complex, they're nuanced, there's more to them than meets the eye. And the last one here, the ability to surprise. You saw it there with Walter White, revealing something about himself in season 5 that we had not heard ever before. Wow, didn't see that coming. Great brands do the same thing. And this is particularly important for mature brands. Mature brands that have perhaps lost their relevance. The great thing that great characters do, the really tricky balance, is to be true to their core, but also do things that are surprising, that we didn't expect. Patagonia has come in and out of my life forever. Mature brand in a category that's highly competitive. There's a ton of new entrants coming in all the time, chipping away at these mature brands like Patagonia. But they reasserted themselves into my life last year by doing a surprising thing. Their Black Friday promotion, does anybody remember that? Where they gave all proceeds of Black Friday sales, the biggest day of the year for retail brands. All proceeds went to charity. Bold move. Didn't see that coming. A mature brand that surprised me. Put it back on my radar screen. I want to make bold moves like that in my life. I incorporate that brand now to an increasing degree into my narrative identity. So, 5 things that we can learn from great fictional characters that can be applied to our brands, that we can listen for. So I would challenge all of you to ask yourself, what is your brand's narrative potential? To think about narrative potential as another measure of brand strength. And the way that you do this is listen to your consumers tell stories about your brand. Listen intently. And when you do, ask yourself, are they really telling a story about themselves? And if they are, if they're using your brand to express something about themselves, if they're incorporating it into their narrative identity, you're onto something. That's loyalty, that's bonding. If they're not, when they tell stories about your brand, if they're not expressing something about who they are, then maybe you should take some inspiration from whoever your favorite fictional character is. And that might reveal to you what your brand's narrative potential could be. So thank you. Appreciate your attention. Hope you enjoyed it. Got something interesting out of it. Got a few minutes left? No. All right.